Hi everyone, and welcome to the Comix Experience Graphic Novel Club. This is the meeting for December 2017. The book is Pashmina. Did I pronounce that right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And we have Nidhi Chanani here, the author, who's here, right here, here. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for coming out and talk to us.
Thanks for having me.
I always start these things kind of in the same place because it's an easy question to get things going. Why comics? What is it for you that it made comics the way that you wanted to tell a story?
So I started my career off doing illustration, and actually, if you kind of rewind completely, I studied literature in college. I never thought that I would make art or comics or did anything like that, but I really was interested in art, and at the same time didn't know anybody in my life who did anything like that. And so it was hard for me to imagine a life that I had never seen an example of. And so I left college. I worked with a variety of nonprofits. I was a secretary. I was a grant writer. I did a variety of things, and through a series of jobs that I did not end up liking. And I ended up getting laid off, and at that time I was starting to get introduced to artists who were making a living doing art, not in my life but on the internet, and it was amazing to me to think that somebody got paid to make art. And then I thought, you know, this has been a thing that I've been interested in for a really long time, but I never really imagined it could be a real job. And so at the time that I got laid off, I decided to enroll in the Academy of Art in San Francisco. And partly why I enrolled there is because they have no portfolio review, because I had no portfolio.
Right.
And I knew that I needed a lot of help. And so it was kind of a sure thing, right? I knew I was going to get in, and then I was going to get the training and the experience and the exposure that I needed to become the artist I wanted to become. And I only lasted there for about a year and change before I dropped out. Partly because it was really expensive, and also because I felt constrained by the program. I wanted to just keep drawing a lot, and they're and this is nothing to slight them, but their process was to make a drawing and then kind of critique it for a really long time.
Right.
And that wasn't working for me. I knew that my drawing wasn't good, but I knew I needed to just draw more, not try to make that bad drawing good. And so through that, I ended up developing a little bit of my skills. And then when I left art school, I dropped out, actually. So I went art school dropout. I dropped out, and then I just challenged myself to finish drawing every day. And I did that for about 5 years. And through that period, I started to work freelance, and I developed my portfolio, and then was working as an illustrator. But then I had this lit background, and I started reading a ton of comics. And I thought, you know, I'm really happy with telling a story in one image, but I want more. I want to tell a longer story. And how do you do that? You do that with comics. So that kind of, I think it combined both my love of literature and my study of literature, as well as my kind of recent study of art and development of that skill set. And I think the other thing too was I couldn't just come out of all those jobs and my lit degree and go straight into comics. I hadn't developed that art style or my art voice. And then when I got to a place where I felt really comfortable, and I could draw, not anything, but I could draw within my skill set anything that I needed to, I thought, okay, maybe it's time, you know, so.
So you started reading comics in your mid-late 20s?
So I actually read comics all through my life.
Okay.
I read the funnies.
Sure.
So that was my first exposure to comics. And I love talking about this because it's just totally true. Garfield books were the most well-worn books in our entire house.
Sure.
And we were, my mom and I were big readers. I mean, she was the one who modeled it for me. And so I read a lot. I read way above my reading level growing up. But I didn't read graphic novels or comic books. I read Amar Chitrakathas, which are like Indian graphic novels. But I love them, but they're all very based on mythology and Hinduism, and so I like them, and I like that they were kind of a little insight into the culture that I grew up in, but they're kind of boring. You know, they didn't provide enough interest, and I thought, it'd be great to have some other story.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't know that at the time.
Sure.
I thought about it later.
Yeah.
And then I fell off comics when, probably in elementary and junior high, when everybody around me was reading superhero stuff, and I just didn't find anything in there. And then in high school, an ex-boyfriend of mine shared with me Ghost World, and I thought it was so interesting. It had so many layers, and from that point I started reading comics kind of sporadically, but whenever somebody handed me one, I was really open to it because it was different than a superhero comic.
Right, yeah.
So, not that that's bad, it just wasn't my taste.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, before you... Well, so after you're at the Academy of Art, you're doing illustration for 5 years. You said you started reading more comics then. Like were you reading a book a week? Were you like what kind of level of like diving in? And then also, what were you reading? Were you reading across the whole line of genre material, kids books? I mean, there's a range of material.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. I think I was reading a lot of probably YA and adult. So I remember reading American Born Chinese, which I talk about a lot at that time, and kind of falling in love with the idea that this story could exist and that there was a publisher that would support it. So I kind of read a lot of first, second titles. And every year when I was exhibiting at San Diego, I would just kind of go to the first, second table and go, hi. I don't know if it made any impact, but I think when we eventually pitched Pashmina, I wasn't necessarily a new name. I also really love Craig Thompson's work. And so I read Goodbye Chunky Rice. That was actually one of my favorites. Still is. And then I just kind of, I went to a comic shop and I just looked around, or I went to the bookshop and I looked around to see what else was there. I read Persepolis, which is definitely more adult. And then I read, this is a little bit later, but this one, Summer, and, other titles like that really resonated with me. So... yeah, and it was just interesting to see this like very wide range of art and storytelling.
No, it's been 15, 20 years. You now can actually have that wide range where prior to that you really didn't. It's a pretty exciting time to be doing comics. What was your pitch process like in putting together that initial pitch for First Second?
So. The interesting thing about my pitch process is it started with a book that nobody will ever see. So the first thing I did when I left art school, well, not the first thing, but one of the things I did when I left art school and I realized I wanted to make comics is I put together a memoir. And I don't want to talk about it because I did put it in the book, and then I realized through the process of making it, maybe this isn't something that I actually want to put out in the world, but I had a pretty traumatic childhood, and so I wrote a memoir about that. And then I realized through the process of talking to my agent that it wasn't necessarily something I wanted to live and relive forever. But within that process, I sent out that that thumbnailed graphic novel to a variety of agents, and that's what landed me my agent. I had 3 agents who were interested, but I knew my agent worked with some of the top graphic novelists, and the other agents that I had contacted were more in the line of a little bit of graphic novel, but mostly prose. And so I wanted to work with somebody who had their foot in the door with graphic novels. And so that was kind of the initial. And I actually didn't revisit doing another comic for I think a couple years. And Pashmina was just brewing at that point. And so my process was I put together kind of a synopsis, an outline, and gave kind of my stats. It's a very interesting thing because I was wanting them to buy my book as a debut, so my social media stats, all any press that I got from it was mostly for my illustration work. And then I also put together a whole manuscript. And so the manuscript, at the point that it got pitched to First Second, was in its 5th draft. And they didn't buy it till my 8th and final draft. So they were interested in it, and they told me So, but then I had a couple calls with my now editor, Mark Siegel, and he just asked me a bunch of questions. And through his questioning me about certain things in the story, certain pieces of information that he wanted to know more about, I revised my manuscript, and then they made the offer. So yeah.
Is the difference between your 5th and your 8th draft significant, or are they just kind of smallish changes going along?
So it's hard to quantify that. I think really, so the base of the story was never something that changed. It was always about a girl who found a magical shawl and went to a fantasy version of India and then learned more about herself. And at a certain point, she went to India herself, right? All of those key elements of the story never changed. What ended up happening between the 5th and the 8th draft is really refining the storytelling and bringing the storytelling up to a point where there was more depth and I understood the characters completely. Whether or not that was seen on the page, it was something that helped me tell a story that was nuanced and layered. So I don't know if that's a sufficient answer.
No, any answer is sufficient. I'm always curious about everybody's process is a little bit different. So that's the thing I enjoy. I enjoy kind of seeing there. When you said manuscript, I mean, how many pages are you talking about?
No idea. I do not remember.
Like roughly? Like 10 or 100?
Probably closer to 100.
Really?
Maybe like
okay.
an 80.
Wow.
Around there.
Wow.
Because I wrote art notes for every single thing. I think a lot of it was just me not knowing, right? Not ever having done anything like this before. And now, working on my second book, I'm skipping the scripting phase completely.
Completely? Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Partly because the manuscript at the 8th draft, from when I went to thumbnails, again, changed so much. And then in the thumbnail process, I redid the thumbnail. So just so you know, Pashmina took me 4 years to make. And in the thumbnail process, I revised all those pages anywhere from 2 to 4 times.
Wow.
So any page you see in that book has been redrawn up to 4 times. So that's a lot of pain and a lot of changes, you know. But all of it was in service of making a better, stronger story. So it's fine. And a lot of it was also in service of me developing as a comics artist. And,
right. Well, you had just...
I'd never done it before.
Exactly. You've just been doing single illustration, which is a completely different animal.
Well, and I had done kind of slice of life comics, but still not the same. Right. So...
Yeah. Particularly something long form like this, which is, I have to imagine, is a bit of a challenge.
Right.
Doing 160 pages it's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
And it's so interesting to me because I always feel like when I first held the book, I was like, oh, it's so tiny. You know, I'm like, this is so much of my life. And it's so tiny. And so this is just my own personal thing. I was like, next time it has to be 200 pages so that when I get it, you know, I don't feel like this is so tiny and I put so much of my life into it. But
Oh, that's funny.
It's tiny, but it's mighty.
Yeah. How many of you guys have read the book so far? That's a good show of hands. Do you guys like it?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. That's the way I wanted to hear it. Very good. Very good. Do any of you guys have any questions? Please. I'll get you in a second, Hammy.
Did you get any ideas from someone or something?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things are based off, especially the characters in the book, they're based off my life. The mom is based off my mom. The suitcase that she finds, where she finds the Pashmina, is drawn from an actual experience I had. I have not found a magical Pashmina shawl, and if I did, I probably couldn't tell you about it. But I remember growing up, my parents went to India, they came back, and they had this suitcase full of presents, really. And I remember opening it up and looking at all these colors, all these objects, and all these smells, all these kind of like candies and different things, and thinking, this is really familiar to me, but it's also very unfamiliar to me because I didn't grow up around that stuff. And just being fascinated by this familiar, unfamiliar feeling, and it maybe making me want to climb in that suitcase, you know, and just go there. And so that experience probably happened to me when I was 11 or 12, and it left an impression on me, and I think that's what I drew. You know, that part of the story came directly from my life. So, yeah.
Have you gone to India since? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I've been there probably less than a dozen times.
Okay.
But you know, and I was born there, but I came here when I was 4 months old. So, but then I grew up in a very, very Indian community. All the people we knew were Indian. All of our weekends were hanging out with other Indian families. So I didn't feel like I wasn't growing up in India, except I went to, you know, American schools and had American friends. And so as much as I wasn't there, I felt it was all around me. I never felt like I wasn't part of it.
No. That makes sense. Yeah. Did you have a follow-up question to that, sir? No? Okay. Hammy in the back?
Make a Pashmina that, you know, takes out dreams and imagination and make people see them.
So I guess the question is how can there be a magic Pashmina? That's a pretty concise version of that, yeah?
How it can be is that this goddess imbued it with special powers. And so the goddess wanted women, when they put on the shawl, to be able to see a different life for themselves and see that they had choice in their life. So the root of the magic is with this goddess. So, Shakti. Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Anybody else have a question before I go back to talking? Or you guys like hearing me talk? Okay, I can keep talking. No, this is good. So, what's your? Well, I guess this book had a very different process than what your process is now. I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So let's talk about you're working on your second book. Is it also a kids YA kind of book?
Yeah, it's you know, again, that's one of the things that's funny about making a book is people ask you, oh, you know, what age group is it good for? And that's really not me that's deciding that. It's really just the marketing department. But the characters determine that too, right?
Sure.
So the characters' age. So in the new book, they're 12 and 13. So it's middle grade. And I feel like every time I do a new project, it's like learning the whole thing over. And every project is different, so that makes sense. This one I'm co-writing with my husband. So that's really interesting, and it's called Jukebox, and it's about two Muslim American girls who find a jukebox that takes them back in time. And so that process, part of the reason I wanted to skip the scripting process is now at the level that I feel I understand comics, but that could change, you know. I mean, and I think also I'm allowing myself a lot more flexibility instead of being rigidly linear about it. There is still a linear process where I'm going from the idea, a very fleshed out outline, to thumbnails. So I'm not skipping ahead, you know, like skipping the outline or anything like that. So I know everything that happens in the story and when it happens. However, I think there's a lot that happens within the drawing and a lot that you're conveying, a lot that the words won't convey. But if I need to stop and script out part of it, I allow myself to do that, you know. So if I need to stop and just write a little bit, I'll write a little bit. Because I'll try to figure out some, you know, story moment. And then I'm also have such a good relationship with my editor too. And so I'm in a situation where if I have a difficult time or if I'm trying to figure out some moment that isn't clear to me, I can just send him a couple pages and say, this is what I'm trying to figure out. What do you think? So I feel like I'm in a different place now. And so that's why, you know, I kind of skipping some things that I felt at the end. I felt that it wasn't doing a service for me to actually put all that work in, and when it ends up mostly kind of going away. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes it's like working any kind of a muscle, right? You know, like you have to, and then you have a muscle, and then once you have the muscle, you don't necessarily have to keep doing this anymore.
Right.
If you use the muscle in other ways.
Yes.
Yeah. That would be my analogy for that. You say you're working on this one with your husband. How formal a process is that? I mean, are you guys
so
writing?
Informal.
Yeah, you're talking about it, right?
Yeah.
You're not.
It's kind of this. It's interesting because Jukebox. We have had a lot of conversation around music in our entire relationship. Part of the reason that I actually was interested in him as a friend was a friend of his who was interested in me, was showing me their apartment. He was one of their roommates, and I went into Nick, is my husband's name, into his room, and his walls were covered floor to ceiling with music posters, and he had musicians on his wall that I had never seen a guy like. This is so whatever.
Right.
Not that he should get props for liking female artists,
Sure.
but it was just surprising to me.
Sure.
You know, and he liked a lot of the artists that I liked, and he came in when I was standing, this girl he didn't know, I was standing in his room just looking at his posters and stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, you like Ani DeFranco, and you like these people, and can I just give you a hug? Because that's kind of who I am. And he was like, who is this tiny person in my room giving me a hug right now? And then we ended up becoming best friends. So that was the basis of our relationship and our friendship. And then it just continued on from there. We just keep talking about music.
Yeah.
We actually just last night were watching this HBO documentary about Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine. And I just feel like it was natural for us to end up writing a graphic novel or working on something related to music together. And so it's not a formal process. I do a lot of the writing, but a lot of the kind of nuts and bolts around music. He is a musician. He had a band for 8 years. They played all around the Bay Area. And he's just been a music lover forever. I love music, but not the way that Nick loves music. And we have probably, I think, 25% of our living room is vinyl records. So, you know, it's just part of who we are.
Yeah. So, is he like helping with dialoguing then at that point?
Yeah.
So not really necessarily the breaking the story down, the beats of it.
He's helping, so each chapter is a song, and so he's helping with the song selection. Like if you're actually asking for like kind of key points, but beyond that, when I'm creating the outline or getting to a place where I think that this should happen between the two characters and maybe this, we're in conversation about that. And he's a sounding board, but beyond that, he's helping with all the particularities around music. Like, would this happen? How would this happen? Would somebody say rare record, or would they say some other thing, you know, as an audiophile, what's the terminology around that? So he's helping with song selection. He is helping with the dialogue for sure, because I want it to be accessible to kids, because that's the age group that it's targeted at. However, I also want adults who are really into music to read it and not be like, oh, musician would never say that, you know, or that would never happen. And that's something that I can't do. I don't know that. You know? So yeah.
Jordan, did we get the
PDF?
PDF?
We can do it. I'm looking at the presentation and I'm not sure how much. I don't know where you'd want to start in it, but
yeah.
we can talk about that.
Maybe we could just show, if you go all the way down, like, okay, that early work one.
This one,
Right?
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Cool.
that's,
Give me one ticket.
yeah.
Give me a
That's
We're
fine.
gonna-
We can go through some
We
of
have
that
some multimedia
section.
for you too.
Yeah.
Ooh, multimedia.
So some of the stuff that's in this presentation that I think folks would find interesting is I have some of my early drawings, so pre-art school drawings, which, you know, you have to take with a grain of salt. But I think it's helpful to know that nobody just came out the gate knowing how to draw. And so this is some of my early work. And what I like to say about it is, it's not bad, right? You can tell what's going on. It's not like, you know, some limb isn't attached to the body properly. But I look at this and I also can see, like, okay, there's an idea there, there's a concept there, but there's still some work to be done, right? There's background work, anatomy work. I used to call my characters at the time that I was drawing this stuff lollipop heads, because I like drawing these big, huge heads and these teeny tiny little necks, and that's fine. You can still do that. But I knew that it was based off of what I was comfortable doing, but not any knowledge of anatomy that I was then just messing with. And so through art school, I learned much more about anatomy. So if you skip ahead, that's me getting better, and then these will just come up. But so eventually, through art school, I learned, you can keep going. I learned how to draw different emotions, right? So happiness, sadness. I also practiced drawing animals. And then a key thing that I like to talk about with budding artists is it's really easy to draw. Well, it's not really easy, but one of the easier things to do is to draw a single character on their own, just in a pose. But one of the best ways to challenge yourself and develop as an artist is to draw two characters interacting with each other. And so I was really working on that. So like he's looking at her, but she's kind of looking down at the string. You know, there's a lot in that image. They're not actually directly interacting, but they are. And so it's learning about those different aspects of drawing that really helps you develop. And then if you keep going, then I, was in art school. I left art school, and then I started developing my portfolio. So this is some of my illustration work. And they fall within a certain theme. Right, I like drawing couples, I like drawing animals and kind of magical places, and then I really like drawing San Francisco. So there's a lot of themes in my work, but it took me a long time to get there, and I had to make a lot of mistakes, and I always say I made a lot of quote-unquote bad drawings, but the bad drawings were in service to get to the good stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And then this is just more illustration, it's bigger, but it's good to see. At that level, you can just scroll through.
Yeah, there's kind of a famous expression that in order to get to the good drawings, you've got 1,000 bad drawings. You've got to get out of yourself first.
Nice, yeah.
Which I've always felt was true as well.
I think that's really true. Yeah, I definitely think it's true.
Yeah, and so for any of you guys at home or you guys in the audience, if you're interested in doing comics, just keep doing it. Even if you look at your own work and you think, oh, I don't know, but just you keep doing and you keep practicing, you keep working, and then eventually it's building that muscle that we were talking about earlier. Yeah.
And then this is me drawing. Actually, it's me drawing a page of Pashmina, and my photo hog cat. She likes to be in she likes to hang out in the studio. I actually have two cats. They take turns hanging out. They don't necessarily like each other. But I have a really weird way of drawing. So this is a Wacom Cintiq. Most people draw, the Cintiq is this big, powerful, I like to describe it as a very powerful, versatile iPad. Do most of you guys know what a Cintiq is? Yeah, okay. So you draw directly on the screen. Most people have it upright and they draw upright. I am not like that. I like to lay it flat like it's paper and draw on it like it's paper, flat. And then as a result, I use hotkeys. So my setup is incredibly awkward. So my keyboard, say I'm drawing here, my keyboard is kind of off to the side. I'm left-handed, right? So the whole setup looks incredibly awkward, but I thought, it's worthwhile to take a photo of it because then you can see what it's like. If you came into my studio at any given day, this is exactly what it would look like, and it's not awkward to me, but it is not very common setup. But I think it also speaks to the fact that you do what works for you. You can't, there was definitely a time where I was in art school and I was absorbing all of these artists and fans of all these artists, and I got obsessed with process. How did they do it? What did they do? What software do they use? What materials do they use? What pens and paper? And all that's really interesting, and I think it's worth it if you have the financial ability to try a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, go towards what works for you. Whatever makes it easy and smooth, and whatever weird setup, and awkward positioning makes sense for you and allows you to do what you want to do, I think is the best. So, yeah.
Now, when you said hotkeys, what do you mean specifically by that?
So, hotkeys are shortcuts. So, I toggle a lot. Like, for instance, if I'm drawing a line, and that's the brush tool, so that's the hotkey or the quick key is B, and then let's say I make a shape and I want to fill it with a color, then I think that it's K, because I use Flash, so it's a K, so then I hit K. And I'm just doing that without even thinking about it. I'm just used to where those keys are on the keyboard. And so I need that because I'm constantly going back and forth. But if I had to stop and go to the menu and drop down and find that, it would break the flow of what I was doing. So I need those keys there.
Sure.
And yeah.
And when you thumbnail, are you doing pen and paper, or you're also doing it on the?
Everything's digital.
Fully digital. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I will sometimes stop and draw something out. How I'm doing jukebox right now is I'm thumbnailing and I have the word balloons, and then I have a notebook where I'm writing dialogue. Because that's just a whole separate thing, and,
Sure.
and I can't write the dialogue into a thumbnail. One, there's not enough space, and two, because I'm drawing digitally, if I'm writing something, it's probably going to be so difficult to read.
Sure.
So yeah, it was mostly digital, and that's fine. I really wanted to, so because it's going back in time, I propositioned this idea that the stuff that's in history, I'm always thinking kind of a concept and how to demark something that's changing within a comic by something visual. And so one of the easier ways to do that is color. So you see that in Pashmina when she's in real life, she's in like kind of this purple, black and white. And then when she goes to the fantasy world, she's in full color. And I thought, okay, I don't want to do the same thing for Jukebox. Maybe when they're back in time, I go to pencil and paper and I do, you know, all the work in pen and ink. But I feel like technology is so at this point that I could still do the same thing and achieve it within digital and just use different brushes. So I still actually haven't worked that out because I'm not at the final art stage. But when I get there, I know I'm going to do something. I just haven't decided what. But there's part of me that has a draw to using pen and ink for comics, and I thought maybe I could do that, but I'm also on a really tight deadline.
Right.
So it's like, you know, kind of managing all those things. At some point, I think I might do one comic like that, but we'll see.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do we have more to go forward?
I don't know. Yeah, let's go through and see. I forget where we're at in my presentation. Oh, this is my booth at San Diego Comic-Con. This is right before I talk about working with Disney. I don't know if that's interesting at all to anybody.
Do you guys want to hear her working about Disney? That was like 50-50, but there was some really enthusiastic nods, so I actually think I'm going to say go for it because a couple of them were really enthusiastic. Yeah.
So when I was at Comic-Con San Diego, one of the things that happens at Comic-Con is artists and writers and celebrities and all those people come together in a convention. You guys are familiar with Comic-Con, so I don't have to explain it to you. Okay.
You know what a comic convention is, right? Even if you haven't been to San Diego? Okay.
Okay, so in those conventions, these artists and writers also get introduced to, or people come by who are working in the industry and they're looking for artists, whether they're looking to hire somebody to work on a game or a storybook or whatever it is, but they're people who have a lot of power who walk through the floor and they're looking for artists. And so at one of the shows, the manager for a shop at Disneyland came by my booth and she was like, I love your work. Would you like to come to Disneyland and sell your work there? And I was like, did you say Disneyland? Can yes, I would like to come to Disneyland. You're inviting me there. So yes, I'll take you up on that. So in conjunction with inviting me to sell my own personal artwork there, they also invited me to create pieces for Disney. And what that means is when I create the artwork for Disney, they own it. So I can't ever make a print or anything like that. I create it, they own it, then they put it on prints or mugs or shirts or whatever they want to put it on, and then they sell it exclusively at Disneyland. So this is one of the pieces I made, I think, last year. And then if you go through, this is the first piece I made for them because my favorite movie growing up was Little Mermaid. So I was really excited to do that piece. And then I did Lilo and Stitch. You guys know who this is, right?
Yeah, Aladdin.
Right? Lion King. And so that's me. So also in conjunction to that, they invited me to be an artist in residence. Each residency has different stipulations, but being a Disney artist in residence means that you go there every weekend and you paint live in front of people. And so most of my work is digital, but I also do watercolors. And so I was painting at the gallery there, watercolors. And then in the back were my art prints, my personal work that they were selling. And so this is some of the you can scroll through. So these are some of the pieces that I made for them, watercolor. So it's kind of like a character, and then I did a bunch of pattern work around them. And so those are some of my pieces for Disney. And those were originals, right? So there was no digital file.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is too heavy of a question, but as a creative person, do you have any particular feelings about doing something like working for Disney where they own everything that you do? They even own the ideas that you come up with that you maybe don't even make it onto a page or into a movie or whatever,
right.
versus doing something like this where you presumably own this all the way through yourself.
Yeah. So my feeling on that is I don't really do a lot of fan art, and so I have no negative feelings about people who do fan art. It's just not something personally that I enjoy doing. I enjoy telling my own stories and coming up with my own ideas. And people who do fan art do both, right? Okay,
sure,
so
absolutely.
I just want to make sure I'm not making anybody upset by saying those things. But when the company that owns the actual property, right, contacts you and says, we want you to make fan art, basically, I'm going to say yeah. Because then I feel that it's right, you know, and it's the proper channel. And maybe that's just my upbringing and my like background of like, this is how it's supposed to go, and this is what's like legal and right. And so I don't necessarily feel any which way about it, except that I feel good when it is the actual source. So I've done some comic book covers as well. I did an Adventure Time comic book cover. I did a My Little Pony comic book cover. And those are also coming directly from the source, right? And so I feel good about that, but I wouldn't in my free time just like sit around and draw like My Little Pony.
Sure.
And it's because I have all these ideas and this desire to tell a longer original story. So, yeah, and plus, I think that for me also, in that situation where Disney's asking me to create artwork, and then they own it, I don't have any feeling of like, oh, well, now they own this artwork that I made. Here's the thing. They made the reason why anybody seeing my representation of it has any feeling towards it, right? So I feel like they're the right ones to own it, right? If you saw, you know, my Belle painting, it's only... you only have a positive experience with that because Disney made the movie, right? They made all of the artwork, and so I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, but like I feel like it makes me feel good, right? That they're the ones who have it because they're the ones who created all the good feelings around it, anyways. So yeah. So I don't have any mixed feelings about it. I do also want to make sure that whatever work I'm doing for freelance or with other companies takes up whatever time it needs to take for me to make my rent, you know, cover my finances, but that it is always in service of me doing original things and pursuing the things that I actually want to, not that I don't want to do that stuff, but it's not what's driving me in my life, you know. And I'm happy to say that most of my income for the majority of my art career has come from my personal work. It's come from selling my prints and my cards, and you know I haven't had to compromise a lot. And this is going to make me sound maybe like a jerk, but I've never looked for freelance work. It's always just come to me.
Jerk. Oh, sorry.
You know, and I feel fortunate in that. I have at certain points and low points, you know, in your career, everybody goes through low points. I'm like, I should just get a job. And then I send out a bunch of resumes to like game studios and whatever. Nobody ever wants to hire me because I don't have the experience that's right for that. But I'm like, oh God, I don't know how I'm going to make my rent next month. So I'm just going to try to apply to all these jobs. And then something or other happens and, you know, I'm able to make it to the next month. So it's fine. I feel like every time I try to get work as an artist, it never works out.
That's funny. That's funny. Now, I read on a Wikipedia page, which means I don't know if it's true or not, but you're teaching at CCA? You're teaching comics at CCA?
I'm teaching in the Master of Comics, Master of Fine Arts Comics program, but I only teach once in the year, so I teach spring, and it's one course. So, yes, and it's great.
Yeah, how does working with young creators influence your own art?
So I've only done one round. I'm doing my second round coming up. And, you know, I think it's always amazing to talk to people who are invested in a medium that you're working in because it allows you to revisit the same things that you love about it and to talk about things and expose them to things that maybe they don't know about. Right? So I remember one of the artists that I worked with last semester was struggling because he felt like he wasn't a good artist, but he was really funny. He was like, I don't know how to do I want to do comics, but I'm not really good at drawing. And then I showed him Ryan North's Dinosaur Comics, which is literally the same drawing over and over and over and over again. For years, he's maintained this, and it's just a new joke. And I was like, so comics is so versatile, you know, but he had not been exposed to that before. So a lot of it is just, a lot of teaching is introducing them to materials, and then specifically working with them on what they want to do, right? So I think it's inspirational in that it allows me to also broaden my own, because you know, for instance, within certain, or with a certain student, you might not know what comics would resonate with them because they have totally different interests than you, and so then it encourages me to read outside of what I would normally read so that I can help them with whatever they're interested in. So I had a student who's really interested in superhero comics, so I read a bunch of superhero comics, you know, and just to like be able to have a good conversation and be supportive to that person. Yeah, so it's great.
Did you like them?
Yeah.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, I also have a, you know, really unique position that I have contacts within the comic book industry.
Right.
So I could say, I need to read some of these. What do you recommend? You know, so I got some
So you read the good stuff, right?
Exactly. Right. So I don't have to sift through it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
I do a lot of sifting.
Right.
I do a lot of sifting. You're one of the few Eastern Asian creators working. You may be the only Indian American that I can think of working. Do you feel a responsibility with that over and above just doing the best work that you can?
So there's also Anand Hirsch and Shivana Sukedo, who I'm not sure if she has, I don't know if she has a book out yet, but I've seen some of her stuff online. It's great. So there's some of us, but it's also one of those situations where I could name them all, you know, in 2 seconds. And so it's a need, but it's also one of those situations where I feel like our community has a long way to go in supporting the arts and supporting people in this field. And absolutely, I feel a responsibility. I feel a responsibility to not only appropriately represent things, but also be markedly successful. Because if I'm successful, then the next time a publisher gets pitched a book by an Indian American or a South Asian American, they're going to say, oh, well, Nidhi's really successful, so we should totally take this on. Or, you know, and then if I'm not, then, you know, I'm not doing any. So at being, quote unquote, a first, which I do not want to be the first. I'd rather have come into this and there's like 10, 15, 20 other people. And then we could have panels together, you know, like it would be great. And I wouldn't go into any cartoonist party or environment and be the only brown person there. But that is the situation, and I do feel like it's an important place to be, and to not be aware of that responsibility would not be serving anybody else who might be wanting to come into the comics field. And so I'm absolutely aware of it, and I absolutely take it seriously. Is there
any, this is the wrong word, but is there any stage fright in representing your culture like this, you know, because there aren't other, not only are you sort of setting a bar, but if you get something wrong, then you may be influencing people to think about Indian culture in that way for the rest of their lives. Right.
Well, I'm not a monolith, right? I'm only one person with one experience. There are a billion of us. And there are a billion stories. And so I think about that, but I also completely reject that responsibility of like trying to make everybody happy. Because there are plenty of people who are not going to like my book. There are plenty of people who are going to find that when they read my book, they're like, oh, you know what? This does not represent my experience. And so I'm excited about that because maybe they really like the book, they like the idea behind it, but it didn't represent their experience. Maybe that pushes them to go and make their own comics. And that's great. And so I don't necessarily think that when I was creating Pashmina, when I was in the moment of writing it, I remember thinking those things like, oh, I wonder if, somebody's going to think, oh, this is not how you say this, or this isn't how you spell it, because like anglicizing Hindi is also its own thing. But I can only do what I can do, and I am only who I am, so I don't think about it too much.
Yeah.
That aspect of it anyway.
I wasn't trying to suggest that you should think that way. I was just curious how much that comes in. Do you guys have any more questions? Yeah, right in front.
Who's the creature in the book? Like the shadow?
You get to it in the end. You have to read all the way through.
You don't want to spoil the end of the book.
It's important. That shadow is very important to your understanding of the whole story.
Yeah.
So.
I would agree with that as well.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is for non-Indians who are reading Pashmina and being introduced to Indian culture and Indian things for the first time, and I think it's then a responsibility on, if it's a child, their parent, or if it's a child themselves, to read more, so they can get like a wider range of experiences, and you can't just watch Bend It Like Beckham.
Sure.
You have to watch all the other films as well, and even beyond that, I don't know. So it's not just one experience, one story. So it's about kind of getting a diverse amount of content.
Sure. So if you had to pick, say, 3 things for someone wanting to learn more about Indian culture,
oh man,
that was age appropriate, let's say, to this, what would you? No, I mean,
I'm totally not prepared.
No, that's fine. I'm not trying to put you on the spot about it. I'm just curious because you brought it up like that. Like, okay, so it's your responsibility to seek out more. So, what would be the suggestion? Because there aren't other comics that I can point to.
No.
Is the problem. And I don't know that, like, as a consumer, I've certainly watched a number of Bollywood movies, but I don't assume that they actually have anything to do with real life in India in any way, shape, or form.
No, I wish.
Yeah.
I wish like you could just be walking down the street and have like this experience and then break out in song.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it would be awesome.
Gosh. Man, I know a lot of books coming out.
Okay.
I think there, Sayanthi Dasgupta's Serpents. Oh man, it's Serpents something. I'm totally gonna blank on it. Then there's a book that's on like tons and tons of best booklets. That's YA. When Dimple Met Rishi, which is a really fun book. I read it earlier this year. I think right now, in terms of graphic novels, obviously, I don't have any recommendations. But in terms of literature, there's a lot of literature coming out. A lot of books within the YA middle grade scope that have Indian American characters. But beyond When Dimple Met Rishi and the Serpents, I don't remember the second part of the title. Nothing is coming to mind right now, which I feel.
That's fine. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that speaks to sort of what I was asking about earlier, too, that there's not a lot of material out there, not just in comics, but in prose as well.
Right.
In film and television, you're not seeing a lot of things that represent you out there.
Right. And I think that the important part of that, what you're talking about, is age appropriate. Right. So there's a lot of adult content. There's Master of None. There are those kinds of things, but in terms of like children's content, it's very lacking.
Yeah. It makes you a pioneer. I like that. I like that very much. Look, I thought this was a terrific book. You guys all thought this was a terrific book, yeah?
Yeah.
Really good. And I know that we're certainly looking forward to the next thing you do, which is Jukebox.
Yeah.
When's that meant to come out?
2020.
2020. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it seems like a long way from now, but my book is due in 2019, so it is a very short timeline. Yeah, for me. Not for you guys.
So we'll all be looking forward to that. I would like to thank Nidhi for coming out and talking to us, talking to the Kids Club. And I really want to thank you for doing this book. I mean, it really touched me. It it showed me a world that I hadn't particularly seen before, and that's one of the things that I love about comics, that you can communicate these things in a really universal way through art. And I want to thank you for coming out and doing it. I absolutely. And I want to thank all you guys for coming out and being here. I want to tell you all that our next month's book, is Claudia and Rex, by and I'm probably gonna, Ulysses Farinas, I believe is how it's pronounced, and Eric Fritas are both going to be here on Sunday, January 21st at 10 a.m. The artist is in Puerto Rico, so we're not going to be able to bring him in, unfortunately, because I'm good, but I'm not that good. We have, even though this is the January book and it's only the 15th of December, we actually have copies right now. So if you're here today, you can pick this up. You'll get it early. We won't have the buttons for you yet. The buttons will be come January 1. But that's next. And then the book after that, I don't have a book to show up, is we've got Mech Cadet U, and the author Greg Pak will be here on February 11th. So January 21st, February 11th, those are the next two dates, because I know there's been a couple of parents who are like, can you tell us earlier so we can plan? So that's me doing that. This has been our December Graphic Novel of the Month Club. We invite you to join. You can be part of these conversations and get a really good comic every single month, which is awesome. Thanks very much. Have an excellent day, and we'll talk to you soon.